Hi, this is Jan at Heritage Public Library. Today I'm going to tell you about latest study shows, finding and evaluating scientific and scholarly research. And so I'm going to help you refine your research skills. And I know you have different levels of knowledge, so hopefully out of my presentation today you learn something. Okay, so what I'm going to start with is a definition of scholarly and scientific information. What exactly am I talking about? So I've got some examples of published information here, officially published. This, and I'll hold it up close, you can see this is the People magazine. And most people realize that this is not scientific or scholarly information. Unless you are doing research on popular culture, this is probably not what you want to claim is scholarly. So what next? There's other magazines that are more serious, say the National Geographic. The National Geographic is not scholarly or scientific either. The National Geographic is a beautifully produced magazine and well written and well researched, but it is aimed at ordinary everyday people. It's not aimed at scientists. Scholarly information is published by universities and scholarly societies to advance knowledge, and it has to have some degree of research in it. So there's formal and serious and trade publications. I'm thinking of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, International Affairs. They are formal, but they're not scholarly or research necessarily. Okay, so the things that are scholarly are things like the Journal of Business Ethics, the Journal of English Linguistics. They contain actual research done by university professors and other researchers to advance knowledge. And there are thousands of them. They often start with the journal of, but not always. And the difference between scientific and scholarly is scientific studies and scientific journals and publications are report the actual results of actual scientific studies. So if you did science experiments at school and you remember that you had to do your hypothesis and your methods and materials and your results and did it like that, a scientific study has that sort of format. It will have actual methods and actual results. And these journals, just to make things even more confusing, will have other things in them. Sometimes they have advertising, sometimes they have things like book reviews, and sometimes they have things that are very similar to magazine articles as well. And they also have reviews, which a scientific study, as I said, has the methods and materials and the results. A review article in a scientific journal, a scientific review article, will actually be reporting on the results of several different other studies. So they'll say something like Smith in 2018 and Jones in 2019 and somebody else in 2020 all studied very similar things or the same thing. And when you put all their results together, the trend is it shows, or they all contradict each other, so we need to do more research, something like that. And okay, so what does an actual scientific study look like? I'm going to show you what I have here. This great big tome here, and I'm not sure if you can read it on this, is the Journal of the American Chemical Society. And you can see that it's a society. Many of these things are published by societies and scientific or scholarly societies. And obviously the Journal of the American Chemical Society is about chemistry. So that one's easy to work out what it's about. And most of the people who get published in here are university professors working at universities, but many of them aren't. They're also working at an industry, especially for chemistry. they'll be working with a company that does chemistry, and they'll still be publishing scientific results, and you don't need to worry about whether the scientific results are okay, because well, you need to know that they work for a company, but it doesn't mean that their work is any worse or any better than something published by a university professor. And I will go and find what one of these looks like. Okay, so this printed document here is the printed bound copies of several of the Journal of the American Chemical Society. It has dozens of scientific research articles in it, and you probably can't see that very well, but this is what it looks like. Dense text, lots of graphs, and because this is chemistry, this one also has a lot of chemical diagrams like that. And these have names that I can't even read because I don't have a PhD in chemical. These are aimed at other scientists. Yeah, I don't have a PhD in chemistry, so I can't even read the names. I'll read one out. Theoretical determination of molecular structure and conformation. Re-evaluation of the strain energies of cyclopropene and cyclobutane, CC and CH bond energies, 1,3 interactions, and a Greek letter, I don't know what it is, aromaticity. I don't know what that word is either. So, and it has a long list of authors. This is how these things usually work. You can't even read it without a lot of prior knowledge. And so this is a book, obviously, and I rescued this from a dumpster in an academic library I used to work at, because obviously these days most of this stuff is accessed online. And this doesn't mean you can just do a quick Google search on chemistry and you'll get this. I'm going to go over how you will find this and how you can actually read it and study it if you want to. So there is that. And the other sort of information that I was going to talk about, there's two more. One was government information, and that can be very, very useful too. The government publishes reports, statistics, meetings, congressional records and laws and all sorts of things like that, and they are really useful for you to know and know how to access. So one of those is the Occupational Outlook Handbook, which is published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the Human Resources departments actually use that to write job descriptions and job application from the employer's perspective. So it's really good to know that that exists. And the other big place that produces information that is more serious, more scholarly, is some non-governmental organizations or NGOs. And of course, most NGOs, often in the news, they'll say things like they're non-partisan, but they do have an agenda usually. So it's good to know that they do. And one that I was going to use as an example is Human Progress. And as you can imagine, that one has an agenda that's saying that humans are progressing. Okay, so the other thing I was going to say about the scholarly information and finding it in book form is I have this one, and prior to the internet, you couldn't search for it by looking online. So life is much, much easier now. You can search for it and access it online. This is physics abstracts, and this, as you can see, is a very old book. I also rescued it from a dumpster at a academic library, and I just rescued a few of them to use as examples. So most of them ended up in the dumpster. And this is from 1917. And I saved this because it has Einstein in it. So Einstein got his paper published in a scientific paper. I couldn't find Einstein, but I found Max Planck. And Max Planck is also very, very famous. And he wrote on a proposition of statistical dynamics and its extension in the quanta theory. And that was published in 1917. And the name of the publication is in German, so I can't understand it. But it's just good to know this is how you used to have to find these things in these books that had an abstract. And an abstract is a little summary of a larger scientific or scholarly work. Okay, so before I go online and show you how to access all these things, I just wanted to go over a little about the publication cycle. And as I already said, thousands and thousands and thousands of these sorts of articles have been published all the time. There's an enormous amount of information out there, and you have to sort through it. And sometimes people say you can only use, or you should only use, primary sources. And primary sources is one of those words that sounds good, but it can have a few different meanings. In history, it means witness reports, diaries, letters, photographs, things like that. Primary sources is basically first-hand knowledge. So in history, it's witnesses and information like that. In science, it's the actual scientific studies I was talking about, with the methods and materials and all that sort of thing. And the review articles don't count as primary, even though they do have a really great use and you can use them for very things, they're not primary. And in literature, a primary source is the actual work that's been discussed. It's the actual poem, it's the actual novel, or it's the actual movie if you're doing a study on movies. So it's not something about the poem, it's not something about the play or the book. Okay, and the other thing about all this stuff is, how do you know if it's any good? So you have to evaluate it a bit yourself. And the first thing that you may have heard of about evaluation is peer review. And basically peer review means that a bunch of the author's peers, who are, not necessarily their friends, but experts in the same topic, read over their paper and look at their results and their methods and all sorts of things, and say if it's valid research. And just because something is peer reviewed doesn't mean it's true, basically. It means that the experts looked at it and thought it was okay. Because there is a lot of controversy in scholarly and scientific worlds. You have to take that into account. There is a lot of spilled ink pots and fisticuffs over all sorts of things. Any scientific endeavor you can think of, science, medicine, scholarly research in history or whatever, somebody's going to disagree. Knowledge wouldn't advance if somebody said, well, this piece of knowledge is wrong, I'm moving on to the next piece, and it just wouldn't advance. So there is controversy, and it's worth keeping that in mind. Not everybody agrees. So peer review is one way to see if something is valid and is likely to be true, but don't rely on it completely, because the peers might be wrong as well. And that has happened all the time. There's a lot of peer-reviewed articles that are not valid anymore because knowledge has advanced, or sometimes even be retracted. And I'll go over retraction in a little while. So how else do you tell if something is valid and worth using? The prestige of the journal is one thing, and you may have heard of the famous journals, the British journals, Nature and Science, and there is a whole raft of journals published by them, Nature Neuroscience, all sorts of journals like that, and they are very prestigious. So a scientist working wants to get published in one of them. And but because something is not published in one of them doesn't mean it's not valid or not useful. I know a sheep scientist who has published in the Journal of Small Ruminant Research. So if your area of expertise is small ruminants and sheep and goats, and you publish in the Journal of Small Ruminant Research, that is fine. To get published in Nature and Science with the type of studies she's doing, the type of science she's doing, it just isn't as exciting, I think, is the issue. And So nature and science articles tend to be something very new, something exciting. So they bear that in mind. And sometimes, as I said, sometimes they have to retract it, or it gets told that they find out later that it wasn't correct, or they add on to it. So knowledge moves. And I have another couple of articles here that I've printed off the internet, and they were in the International Journal of Life Cycle Assessment. And life cycle assessment is the life cycle of consumer items mostly. And I am studying the life cycle of clothing. So this is the sort of stuff I'm looking for. These are perfectly valid articles, and this one is in a journal called Resources, Conservation and Recycling. And as you can see, even the names of the journals are very narrow. They go very, very, very narrow. And this is what a scholarly article looks like when it's printed. This one is from Springer, is the publisher, which is a very, very famous publisher. And you can see it's got lots of tables. It goes on and on and on, and it's pages and pages long. And another thing to be aware about science and reporting on science is that scientists will write 30 pages about one molecule. A lot of these are about one molecule, 30 pages long. And as I said, I can't understand a word of the chemistry one. Science is iterative. It a little bit builds on another and builds on another, builds on another, builds on another. Okay, so so if it is published in Science or Nature, it can be prestigious, and there are lists of prestigious journals. And if it's peer reviewed, it adds another level of prestige, but again, it doesn't necessarily mean it's true. So how else do you evaluate a scholarly or scientific article? And one way is to look at citation counts, because as I said, science is iterative. Scientists quote each other. It's actually a requirement at the beginning of an article that scientists read what other scientists said and cite them and say, so just to show they're not doing exactly the same thing as somebody else. And if they are doing exactly the same thing as somebody else, they should say, well, we're repeating Jones's and Smith's experiment and we're seeing if we get the same results. But they cite each other, and how many times something gets cited is usually a good indication of how important other scientists found it later. And on Google Scholar, which I'll be showing you shortly, there is a citation count. It's not the best standard citation count. That comes from the science. It comes from ISI Web of Science, but chances are you don't have access to that. I don't have access to that. So when you do look at Google Scholar, you can see that the citations are really important. And this particular one here from the International Journal of Life Cycle Assessment, it's the environmental impacts associated with the production, use, and end of life of a woolen garment. So basically, these people did a bunch of laundry and did a scientific paper on it. So that's the sort of narrowness of it. You can see this is the bibliography. You haven't got a chance of reading it, and it's 2 pages of this small font of a bibliography. So you cite a lot of other articles, and a bibliography is just basically a list of other things you read to write your article. So they have dozens and dozens and dozens of other things they read. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to finally screen share and show you some things online. And let me do that. Just one moment. And it takes a little while to come up. So here it is here. So as I said, I've got these print articles, but I wanted to show you how to get it online. So what I have here is the American Chemical Society. And this is the Journal of the American Chemical Society. So what I have up on the screen online is this. And very few universities even are buying this in print. That's why they were throwing it out, because they don't have room. And it was a small university, they don't buy it in print anymore. So this is how most people access is online. And I'll go through how us as members of the public can access, and how you can access it if you are at a university. So this is the Journal of the American Chemical Society. So I scroll down and see what they have there. Here you can see scholarly scientific articles, similar that I talked about, that you really have to have an advanced, probably a PhD in chemistry to understand a word of it. Nuclear resonance vibrational spectroscopic definition of the facial triad. I don't understand that. So I'll go down and you can see that, yeah, they do have illustrations because they have all these chemical structures, and that's for chemistry, but a lot of scientific articles will have illustrations that are diagrams, and history research will have historical photographs or drawings or whatever like that. Okay, so this, and then, so I clicked on one of these just to see about getting it. Okay, so this is the, I can't even say that word, the something or other synthesis of atropisomeric analytes. Okay, so I won't try and embarrass myself and try and pronounce that. And you can see this, say you wanted this. Okay, you want to look at this. There's a thing here that says read online. So you go, great, found it, I want it. And if you scroll down, you get the abstract. And it's abstract, as I said, is a little summary. And scientific articles often have a little summary, and it's a summary of the whole thing. It'll tell you a little bit about why they did it, the results, and the conclusions in usually a fairly short paragraph. Again, the abstract can be really hard to read. If you don't have much background in it, it's still really hard to read. So I clicked on read it online, and I'll go over here, and this is what it came up with. It says access through your institution, more access options. It didn't just pop up. This one, they are not necessarily free. So I will go down here. To access the full text, please choose an option below. So this is pretty common. So access through your institution. And if you do happen to be a university student or have access to a university, because sometimes universities let their alumni use their libraries, you can click on that and go through the process to get it. Otherwise, let's have a look. It says purchase access. And this is really common. Okay, it says you can log in with your ACS ID. So that's your American Chemical Society ID. That's if you belong to the American Chemical Society. And probably only chemists belong to the American Chemical Society. It's probably very expensive. I didn't look it up. Okay, so here we have shopping cart. And who knew that you'd have a shopping cart on the American Chemical Society journal? But there's a shopping cart, because if you want to read this article, you have to pay, and hopefully you can see over here, $40. And this is really common. Sometimes it's $60, sometimes it's $65. This is not free. This is obviously behind a paywall. And for this $40, you only get to look at this article for 48 hours. So these are really, really expensive. And there are other ways to try and find it. As I said, if you work for a university, if you are a student or work at a university, you may be able to access it through your university library. Some libraries have interlibrary loan. Unfortunately, Heritage Public Library doesn't have interlibrary loan. Some libraries, if you have access to another library, will get it for you from another library. And generally, if it was an article like this, they would send you a PDF of it in an email. They wouldn't print it. If you interlibrary loan a book, they generally send you the whole book. And some interlibrary loan is shut down because of COVID, but you would have to ask the institution what they're doing for interlibrary loan at the moment, and how many you can have per month, and all sorts of, they will have stuff like that. And the other thing you can do is public universities, because the taxpayer is helping pay for them, they are generally required to let people have limited access to their databases of scholarly research. And and you generally have to go into the university. So where we are here at Heritage Public Library in New Kent, Charles City, the closest public universities are William and Mary and Virginia Commonwealth University. And you'd have to check again with COVID what hours they are, what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do at the moment. And generally, you have to go in and you'd have to ask the librarian to help you find this, but you could get this article if you really wanted it, generally for free. And well, generally you can get it because they have to have a subscription to it, which is another whole area that I won't go into too much detail. Universities buy access to these articles. University is paying a lot of money for it, and it's generally all bundled together in a subscription. So you'd have to check with them how to access it. Okay, and what else have I got here? Oh, okay. So the other thing about evaluating an article is sometimes, even in Science and Nature, and it's generally quite famous when it happens in Science and Nature, articles get retracted. So this is retraction watch. And if an article is retracted, somebody says this is not valid, there's something dreadfully terribly wrong with it. And this is after it's been published, and this is after it's gone through peer review. So this still happens. So there is a bunch of stuff that has been retracted recently. And sometimes they're not completely retracted, as you can see here, an expression of concern. And obviously, presumably that means that somebody said it wasn't completely valid, but I'm not exactly sure what that means. Okay, so how else do you find them? As I said, if you have access to a university, you can search in their library webpage to find articles. If you are really, really interested in chemistry and just want to look at the Journal of the American Chemical Society, you can search on that page I just showed you. But generally, you wouldn't want to do that. You'd want a more general search. So there's three places I'm going to show you now. One is PubMed and Medline Plus. I'm just going to show you, compare those quickly. And I'm going to show you Google Scholar. And unless you're looking for biomedical information, Google Scholar is the more general place to look for the general public. So I'll start with PubMed. And I'll show you what this is. So PubMed is a big, I think 30 million long list. And it is a list of these scholarly articles. And PubMed, as you can imagine from the med part, is biomedical. It's about medical things. And it goes a little bit off because, as I said, it's got 30 million. And it is a product of the US government. It is made from the National Library of Medicine, which is part of the National Institutes of Health. And I've actually been to the National Institutes of Health in Maryland, and the National Library of Medicine is actually a building there. It's actually a library. And they make PubMed, and they curate everything that goes in there. And I will do a search in PubMed, and we'll see what comes up. You can see there's a big search box here. Whoops, and I have to be able to spell. And I'm putting in a very general search because I'm putting in diabetes. And we'll see what happens. And it came up with, and I hope you can read this, 781,000 results. And that's fewer results than you'd get, say, on a Google search. But remember, these are actual scientific studies. And they come up first in order of date. No, they didn't come up in order of date. Oops. Yeah, well, you can change how they come up. And I'm not going to go into PubMed in a lot of detail because I did another class on PubMed. And if people are interested, I will do another class on PubMed. I also previously taught entire classes on PubMed. So I'll just show you some things quickly. There's lots and lots of articles, and you can limit it in various ways. And I'm not sure how you're used to searching, but if you look over here on the left, you can just get the abstract, you can get the free full text. yes, you can limit to the free ones, because we saw that one from the American Chemical Society. It wasn't free, but some articles are, and some of them are because the publisher chooses them to be free, or increasingly nowadays, if a study is done with federal tax dollars or tax dollars from the government, they require the information to be released freely to the public, which makes sense to me, because we are paying for the research, so we get access to the results. And the publishers aren't necessarily very happy about this, because it is a big business, and they the editing and formatting and stuff of the articles and the peer review is very expensive. So it's a controversy, it's ongoing. And so you can see all the different types of things you can get, and you can go down and look, and you can see this one is in Spanish. It tells you that. You can see that it's not in English because it has these brackets around it. PubMed is American, but it captures articles from all over the world. And PubMed is freely available to anybody anywhere in the world. And it's actually used more out of the US than in the US, because I think because many people in other countries don't have access to good university libraries. So PubMed is a great product done by the National Library of Medicine in our government. So there is a bunch of articles about diabetes here, so I just wanted to show you that quickly. And these are actual, most of these that came up first are actually reviews, but it looks like I won't go into great detail. Then I'm going to go to Medline Plus. That's also made by the National Library of Medicine, and this is aimed at the general public. Medline Plus is aimed at the general public, and I'll just show you what happens if I put a quick oops, I spelled diabetes wrong again. Okay, did you mean diabetes? Yes, I did. I just can't type. And as you can see, this is a different sort of information. This one is aimed at the general public. And even the writing is bigger, and this is more, it's more colorful, there's more space on the page, and even the font size is bigger. So if you know somebody that's been diagnosed with diabetes, or you have been diagnosed with diabetes, this is a good thing for you to look at first. Unless you wanted scientific studies, then PubMed is the place to go. Okay, so now I'm going to show you Google Scholar, and this is the more general one. And if you don't know Google, you do a Google search, and it's just google.com. Google has a lot of other ways to search. You may have searched for images, or you may have searched for videos or news, but they also have this Google Scholar, which has been around for quite a long time, and it's a really good way to look for scientific and scholarly information if you don't have access to a university library. So you can see here they're suggesting different places to search. And I was going to say journals, because some of these are journals, and some of them are the CDC, of course, is a government agency, and Elsevier and Oxford and Wiley are publishers. So they're suggesting places that people must search frequently, because that's generally how Google works. And this is the New England Journal of Medicine, NEJM, and the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA. And as I said, they're very prestigious too, and the Lancet, and Cell, which is also a Nature publication. Here's Nature and Science. So you can just search within them, but generally it's better to search more generally. It's generally what I do. Oh, and I still can't spell diabetes. Okay, diabetes. There we go. Diabetes. Okay, so as you can see here, here's a list of search results, just like any Google search, but it's quite different. There's 3 million results come about diabetes, because of course there's lots and lots of research on it. And this one you can see what it is. It's a book. And this one is an article, or actually it's from the American. You can just, and you'll look down at the next line and you'll see who it's from, by the American Diabetes Association. So these are a bit more general, so I'm going to go further down and try and find one that's more of a medical scientific article. So this one is the treatment of what type 1 diabetes mellitus on development and progression of diabetic nephropathy, the epidemiology of diabetes interventions and complications. So again, it's got a very long, complicated title that I have trouble pronouncing. I do know what the words are. And this, as you can see here, was published in one they had on the front, JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association. And it was published in 2003. So it's worth noting the date because medical research and scientific research can go out of date really fast. So, and it is in PubMed, and as I said, some of the things in PubMed are free, and it gives you the PubMed link here. This is the PubMed link, and the National Institute of Health.gov. And the other thing to see about this is the entire little paragraph here is authors. There's over a dozen authors on this, and that's pretty common for these too. Lots and lots of people work on the research. And I think even the people that supervise the research and don't actually get their hands dirty or in the test tubes are often put on the authors. And the other interesting thing to see here is cited by. So you know how I said citations were important to see how prestigious an article was. This one is cited by 372 articles since 2003. Obviously, if it's published in May this year, it might not have so many citations. This one was published by 319. And these citations, they're cited by other scholarly articles, so they can actually work it out in their databases. If I cited it in a paper I wrote for a class or something, that wouldn't count. Although, of course, you know, lots of students and school students will cite things. Okay, so that is PubMed. So, so hopefully that gives you a quick overview of the scientific publishing cycle and how to access and evaluate scientific and scholarly information. It is a huge area, and it's just a quick overview. So hopefully it answered more questions than it raised. So you can ask library staff more questions or ask me more questions. So thank you for listening. Okay, goodbye. Stop sharing. Okay, and I will stop recording. Goodbye.